For those who don't know, I'm Dr. Jerome Eugene. I'm the training director here at Rancho San Diego. We're going to talk today about parenting. I thought it would actually be a really good opportunity for us to put together all these experiences that you're all been having and think about it a little bit. What works, what doesn't work, why, what I want us to, we'll go over what makes it complex. Is that a nice enough word? Sometimes to work with parents. And then we'll talk about what we think, and I want to hear from everybody because I know that maybe you guys don't work too much with parents, right? At all?
A little bit. I PVC gym.
That's right. Yeah.
Do the workshop.
Yeah. So everybody here works at some capacity with the parents. So we'll put our brains together and see what we learn from this experience. I did a little search. I thought I would search Google to see what they have on parenting. So this is by no means a scientific measure of anything. But when you put in Google the word parenting and you go to images, this is what came up. And if you scroll down, it stays like these younger. It's all about early childhood. I know. Right? So when you ask Google, what's parenting? Google says babies, toddlers. Maybe there's a latency kid here, some in there. I didn't scroll. I mean, you can scroll for days, right? I didn't do that. But I didn't see in my unscientific search, I didn't see any adolescents. So parenting somehow is not associated. If this represents our culture's association, or I don't know what it does represent, but there aren't any adolescents here. Now how do we make this go away? This fancy Prezi thing. There's got to be a way to make this go back. Let's try again.
Double top?
Thank you. All right. So what makes, so we know, or some of us know, that parenting is complicated always, right? What are some of, it's complicated and it's wonderful, right? You saw in those photos, they all kind of sunset, and some of the books that I'm going to refer to the book list a lot, because that's kind of where I got a lot of the ideas. So especially Brainstorm, if you want some inspiration on why parenting is a great thing and how to enjoy it, and what, when you're not enjoying it, what that might mean about where you were in personally as a parent. Brainstorm is a good place to look. But it's also a very difficult, it's a very challenging, I'd say, experience. So there's, I'll go over this quickly because I want us to get to the teenagers. Kids don't come with manuals, right? And I think that those pictures from Google kind of show we don't really get taught. We have these ideas about what parenting is. Some of us come into it more prepared than others, but there isn't. I think there isn't. We all learn how to drive, right? There are very culturally structured ways to teach us how to use technology and how to do things. I'm not sure that you can say that about parenting. We all rely usually on our personal experiences, and that sometimes can be a great treasure, and sometimes it can be a setback, depending on your background. Your target of the kid you're taking care of, they change all the time. They keep developing. You figured out the diapers, now they're walking. You figured out how to keep them, safe in the house. Now they're going to school, and there's a whole other set. So there's always new things. You always have to adjust to a new situation. Of course, parents are people, so they have their own issues. We worked with plenty of parents who have substance abuse issues. We have parents who have mental health issues. Your anxious parent, your obsessive parent, everything that's out there, parents have them too. And that always will affect parenting, so that's something that when we come to help parents and when we want to support them in their parenting challenges, we have to look at. Now, what's new when adolescents come in? Because really there have been changes happening all the time, and whatever complexities were there, they were there all the time. So what's new now? Nothing?
Lots of things are new, Dr. White.
Thank you.
Yeah, so
Tell us
from
something.
them developing and just their function of their brain, their maturity, their ability to think abstractly. So now they're starting to recognize that they are individuals outside of the family. They're no longer just in with the family. Their
Okay.
peer groups now are becoming more important than the family. They're struggling in the process for individuation, wanting to separate from their family.
So awesome. So that speaks to the fact that there are very unique developmental challenges that come with adolescence, right? And they're different. They are and they aren't, but they have a different quality now than they were. So when we had a toddler, we had to let them kind of explore, and they do rapprochement. They go a little far and then they look back to see if it's okay. So we've dealt with things like autonomy and things like that before, but now it's a little different. It's the stakes sometimes are higher, right? Now it's not about whether I'll go on the slide or not. Now it's whether I'm going to go to college or not. Now it's, am I going to try drugs or not? Now it's, am I going to have sex or not? Things that have very significant long-term, sometimes permanent consequences that maybe weren't there before. What other developmental tasks do teenagers have that you can use the cheat sheet on the screen? Is it impossible to see? Won't get any bigger. No, it's small. So there's sexuality, right? Freud told us that there's sexuality all the time, but it's in our face when they turn into teenagers. So in terms of behaviors, in terms of the kind of things that their teenagers are interested in compared to younger kids, all of that changed. If we want to teach them, for a lot of parents, the idea that you might need to talk. As parents, usually we want to teach our kids and guide them. For many parents, the need to guide and talk about sex with their kids is not easy, and sometimes that's an understatement. So that's sometimes something difficult that maybe wasn't there before as much. You could have just brushed it off. Oh, it's the birds and the bees, whatever we do to avoid sometimes talking about sex with our kids. What else? Actually, you mentioned peers. So there's a shift in adolescence. Always friends are important, but because of the need to develop an identity, I'm also not sure that this need for separation from family is culturally across the board. I'm in the process of kind of looking into that, what the literature has to say. My sense is that in some cultures it's not such a big deal, actually, and that adolescents are expected to stay within the family to a larger extent than they are in our culture. But having said that, in our culture there is a strong message and lots of ways where it's communicated verbally or not verbally to adolescents that no, you should not be around your parents. No, your friends are the ones who need to. Or there's a tug of war, right? We know that adolescents are not ready to go off with their friends. They do not They do not buy houses and pay rent and find jobs together. They remain dependent on their families, and that's significant. But there's now maybe a new tension or a new push and pull between wanting to belong. In the book that you have on your list, Untangled, she calls it the tribe. There's the tribe and there's the family, and we need to work with that as parents, and that's, I think you all have had situations where that was, especially with the kids who use drugs, and their tribal community becomes also their substance abuse community, and how to pull away from that without isolating your child, or it has to be mitigated somehow. Adolescents need to figure out who they are, right? For little kids, what's for a little kid their main source of identity? Who do they usually identify as? Who do they look up to and say, oh, I'm like that? Their parents, right? We know that little kids insult each other by calling their parents names or saying nasty things about their parents, right? Because it hurts them. They are their parents. Their self-esteem is however they perceive their parents, and that's why abuse is so damaging, because it creates all these conflicts in terms of how can I identify with somebody who does this to me, and what does that mean about me? So adolescents are starting to move away from that. They're starting to move into having their own, or questioning, or thinking about what it is about this parent that, you know, and it can be simple things like music preferences or political preferences, you know. Little kids will usually assume that whatever their parents are voting is the right thing to vote. When you're a teenager, you start questioning that. We had kids who questioned their parents' beliefs and religious affiliations. So that's when that all happens. So one way to look at it is to think about it as the Wizard of Oz. And I wish I could say this was my idea, but it's not. It's also from the book Untangled. Let's watch this little clip and see what this has to do with adolescence.
And I believe my eyes. Why have you come back?
Please, sir, we've done what you told us. We brought you the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West. We melted her.
Oh, you liquidated her, eh? Very resourceful.
Yes, sir. So we'd like you to keep your promise to us, if you please, sir.
Not so fast. Not so fast. I'll have to give the matter a little thought. Go away and come back tomorrow.
Tomorrow? Oh, but I want to go home now.
You've had plenty of time already.
Yeah. Do not arouse the wrath of the great and powerful Oz. I said come back tomorrow.
If you are really great and powerful, you keep your promises.
Do you presume to criticize the great Oz? You ungrateful creatures think yourselves lucky that I'm giving you audience tomorrow instead of 20 years from now. Oh, the great Oz has spoken. Oh, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The great Oz has spoken.
Who are you?
Oh, I am the great and powerful Wizard of Oz.
You are? I don't believe you.
No, I'm afraid it's true. There's no other wizard except me. You humbug! Yes, it's exactly so. I'm a humbug.
Oh, you're a very bad man.
Oh, no, my dear. I'm a very good man. I'm just a very bad wizard.
So what does this have to do with anything?
At some point in the kid's life, they grow up and they realize that something their parents told them isn't true. And it kind of just breaks it shatters their whole world. Like, Santa Claus isn't real, the Tooth Fairy isn't real, like, all the things that they've been told and they believe, they come to find out later on in life, it's like, oh my God, my parents lied to me. You guys are terrible people.
Or finding out like that their parents disappoint them, like their parents are flawed and that they're real people and that they're,
right.
you know, they're late and they don't follow through on things, and how do you give them the cues and reconcile?
What facial expression usually does it take the shape of? Lots of eye rolling, right? The Untangled really does a good job of helping parents accept the eye rolling. You know, it's okay. They can roll their eyes, whether they do what they're asked to or not. That's what we need to focus on. But the attitude, some of it is good and normal, and it's part of the development. So her idea about this is that really, and we'll talk a little bit later about other aspects. In IFP, you can talk for days about attachment, about brain development and neurology and body changes and social media. You know, there are a lot of things to change, but I think a really thing that, a super important thing that touches to the core of the relationship is that the relationship between a child and a parent really changes in a very, very qualitative way during adolescence, and this is a big piece of it. So we talk about the brain and how Ashley mentioned they can think better. They can think abstract now. They couldn't before. They're still very emotional. Adolescents at times do seem to have tantrums like toddlers, and there's some neurology behind it. It seems that they are probably prone more to emotional kind of reactivity that will later calm down once their frontal lobe is fully developed. But in terms of the relationship, what's really significant is this unveiling, and it can be how dramatic that unveiling is can vary. Right? We had a kid here recently who found out. So I think she was at the time, I don't know, 13 or 14, and she found out that the person she considered her father was a stepfather and not her biological father. Big Wizard of Oz moment. And I think everything that led to her coming here was a kind of a fallout of that. So really a lot of trust issues, identity issues. So who am I? Who are you? The issue of lying. We've had a family who didn't tell their child that they were adopted until a little bit before coming here. I thought that people don't do that anymore, but apparently, I think in the past it was more common. So secrets and what happens when you have secrets in the family and all those kinds of things. It's interesting that they chose Toto to unveil. So everybody with their psychodynamic inclinations can run with that and kind of figure out what that symbolizes. But it's a big deal, and it's a parent can't avoid it because it's them that they're put. Your actual job as a parent is put in the spotlight, and a lot of things are questioned. I think we see all the range of reactions to that, from super defensiveness and anger and irritation to parents who kind of start questioning themselves and go all the way to the other end. So the unveiling changes the relationship, and when we come in, we need to think, okay, so what do we do about this? A lot of times providing these kind of informations about brain development isn't really what's going to help the parent deal with this shift, and we need to figure out what is going to help them, depending on all these other things that might be going on. Let's do another fun thing. My parents don't punish me anymore. The last time they did, I hit all the remotes. So, again, the issue around authority and discipline, right? Because we were telling, you know, you can find any number of books on discipline for toddlers, for grade school kids. And usually we tend to think that kids that age crave that kind of direction, crave that kind of safety that is provided by knowing what's right, being told this is okay, this isn't okay, this is what you need to do, this is what you. Even if sometimes there are unpleasant consequences, it helps kids feel safe. In adolescence, you get a kind of pushback that in most, I mean, there are also little kids who are oppositional, but usually you don't. In adolescence, you expect it, even from somebody who's not oppositional. And actually, you would worry a little bit if a kid is not showing any of this. And you probably didn't see here very many of these kind of kids, but maybe you know them from your personal life. Kids who really keep just doing the straight and narrow and not questioning and not making choices that might upset their parents. And there are prices for that. And again, there's a cultural component here, but we would wonder if that's what's going on with a kid like that. And we as professionals, we need to think what is the mean, what is the healthy middle. When does rebellion become being oppositional? I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that. It's not the kind of kids that end up here usually, because if they're doing everything right, they would have no reason to be here. But can you think of what would tell you if a kid is, this is okay rebellion, but this seems like a little bit too much?
Well, I would think that, like, I don't know, the line would change with, like, how frequently it's happening. Like rebellion, they might, just kind of choose their battles and really do something that, if it was like a social activity, but if someone is being defiant, I would think that every single thing would be a fight.
So the frequency.
And kind of like what other consequences there are for the choices that they're making. So if they're putting them in difficult situations and risking either their personal safety or their health or safety of others, it would be more like a problem and not something that just like a
So if the consequences are beyond the household, maybe that can be a sign that, okay, things are getting a little out of control. Yeah. Other thoughts? Why do you think would a kid, you wouldn't do it here, but if you were working with a family where the kid is really not doing any of these things, you're not seeing any signs of rebellion, what would you think might be going on, or what would your concern be?
Depression could be something that the kid is trying, instead of trying to fight it, kind of just press.
That it might be internalized. That energy outwards, or the questioning energy might be going inwards. I'm not, okay. And that can turn into depression. Why else would we be a little concerned with a kid who's not showing any signs of, I don't want to say rebellion, but any signs of pushback?
I would think severe enmeshment.
Okay.
Or potentially like triangulation if it's like if parents are separated and the same mom and daughter are super crazy.
So you're saying that in a situation like that, even though if they're not presenting with a symptom, you would be concerned that their task of developing their own person and their task of figuring out for themselves what's right and wrong and creating their own goals for their life and their own likes and dislikes and things like that, all these things will not happen because what we call in psychology is enmeshment, right? There aren't clear boundaries. What's me and what's you? Am I doing this because I want to do this, or am I doing this because I'm afraid my parent will, of my parent's reaction, or my perceived, how I perceive that might impact them, and that can hinder. So it's not a symptom yet, but you're worried that there will be symptoms down the road. Yeah, exactly. So we want to look at both, and I think this is helpful for parents to know that the eye rolling and the attitude and the pushing of the boundaries, there is a very healthy thing to it. We don't want our kids to be to do everything they're told without questioning. It's okay if you're 10. Even a 10-year-old, you want them to explore some thoughts. But a teenager, you really want them to think about it. And we know that teenagers that don't do that might be more influenced, might be bullied more, because they don't put those boundaries. They might be more influenced to use drugs, have sex that they don't want. You know, all kinds of unpleasant things can come if you have a difficulty with figuring out what it is you want and having that kind of thing. Any thoughts about the remote? I think this comes up every single IFP. I'm sure it comes up also in your family sessions. That we're, I don't like to think, oh, in the good old days everything was easy and everything was fine and now things are difficult. I think a lot of these challenges probably have a very long history, but the way technology moves at this age, I think, is unprecedented. So we're in a situation where often the kids have this advantage over their parents in terms of knowing how things work and how to, and you know, we've known kids who got really, really sophisticated in being able to dismantle the apps that were supposed to let the parents know where they are, and calling from one place and it looks like they're at another place, or coordinating with their friends and creating all kinds of. So this is an ongoing challenge. And we sometimes, I think we as a profession, we have some answers, there's some guidelines, and we'll talk about it in a little bit. I don't know that there's a lot of research on what really works to keep kids safe, what doesn't keep kids safe. We know that in terms of our laws are behind the times as far as how teenagers, and not just teenagers, also, was he a Congress member? Or, his last name is Wiener,
yes.
Right? We know that grown-ups use the internet and use technology as a sexual tool, and our laws place it in a criminal place, and we get kids who are doing things that my impression are very common and I think on some level much safer than actually having sex, but yet they're ending up with being labeled as pornographers and child pornographers and causing all kinds of trouble. So not just we might be, not everybody, but some parents might find themselves in a disadvantage as far as just understanding the technology and how it works, but also as a society, we're behind and we're setting our kids up for failure. And the whole issue of everything stays on the internet, kids posting things, not being aware. So how do we teach them? How do we guide them when we're really not familiar? We can't rely on our experiences, right? Because the cell phones we had growing up, maybe you guys had cell phones, and I didn't have cell phones. My kids were shocked to hear that we didn't have a tablet, that both their dads didn't have tablets when they were growing up. They could not understand why their loving grandparents would not provide us with these elementary tools of survival. They were really, like 2 days after we told them that, they were still, so what? But we can't do the thing, and you know, there's always a good, sometimes when we rely on our experiences, it's not always the best, so that's maybe a good thing. We need to just figure out something new, but it's definitely a challenge. And the risks are pretty high. We know that there was a big review in the Washington Post on how the drug cartels now they don't need to have a hub in a city. It used to be that, you know, urban areas were kind of hit hard by drugs and rural areas were not, and that's kind of turned around, and it's a lot because of cell phones. because you don't need to have anymore somebody, somebody actually coming to a place and doing something. People can communicate with their cell phones, and now rural areas are hit as hard or even worse with drugs because the cartels are able to get the supply to demand. So there are really significant consequences to technology. What else did I say here? This is kind of along the same lines. The invisible friend. Right? Who worked with a kid whose sexual activity on the internet had been a problem, or was thought maybe to be problematic? Right? We see a lot of kids like that, and sometimes it's sometimes it's questionable. Sometimes it needs to be determined: is it or is it not a problem? A long time ago, one of our first kids, we were doing, Gladys and I, we were doing a discharge, kind of planning with the family, and Dad insisted, and they found out, they looked at his iPad and saw that he was doing porn on his iPad, and the parents were irate. And I decided to do some normalizing around that, If you look at your kids' friends, they probably all do that. So here, culture, religion, all kinds of things go into that in terms of, and we need to be cognizant of that and sensitive, and at the same, so again, there's all that, we get pulled into what we think is okay for the kid, what the parents think is okay for the kid, but again, the kind of having to mitigate that huge access that the internet provides. Any other thoughts on technology and teenagers? What are some guidelines that what do you tell parents about internet and safety and how to be a parent, how to parent with technology around?
Talking about scheduling limits.
Okay.
Same thing as if they were going to a friend's house. It's a communication between the world and themselves. If it's just in your house, that doesn't mean that nothing's going on. So limiting and monitoring.
So a lot of times it turns out, we talk about all the things that are different for adolescents and how adolescence is not like it used to be, but a lot of the parenting principles actually are kind of the same, right? We want to have consistency, we want to have structure, we want to have rules. We need to, they're a little different, and we might not, yeah, but on some level, it's still the same. So, there needs to be limits. You can't, so what are some limits that you guys talk about with families around technology?
Well, this is getting really specific, but I know I sometimes try and have a conversation between the kids and the parents about what social media apps do you intend on, would you like to use when you get home? Like what are some that you maybe shouldn't? And what are some accounts that you might delete? And maybe the kid wants to use Snapchat, but the family's really against that. So we're trying to figure out, okay, are you okay not having a Snapchat account? So talking about the specific accounts and is Facebook okay?
Based on their history.
Facebook's not? Yeah.
Yeah, it can get, right? So, and that's the challenge, we tell parents don't micromanage, and yet here we are, and we need to kind of do some micromanagement.
Or like turning it in at night, not having it on all night long.
Right? So, we don't let them drive, they have to turn in the keys when they come back from the movies. So we start, and I think for a lot of us, because I don't know how many of us do that as grown-ups, so as parents we start needing to think about limiting things and using responsibly, and so not having the cell phone or not having any computers really in bedrooms. It's a recommendation that I've been seeing a lot. Setting times maybe for using media. It's very hard because of the size and Wi-Fi. It's hard to it is harder to control in the way that we can control a car. It's harder to know where things are and who's doing what. Kids need computers for school, right? So we can ban them we can't just take control over everything. Most kids can't do their homework without a laptop.
Those schools are giving them.
Yeah, or iPads.
Or iPads,
Yeah. And
And
we have this, and
saying
we have,
it's limited, but
and we have the same problem here, and we know that some kids try to push the boundary and do things that they're not supposed to do. And our school staff can tell us all about it.
Would you like to hear?
All right. Any other thoughts on technology and parenting? Prezi likes the cartoons more. This is talking about that that push that parents need to put up with to a degree. And this mom loses it actually, right? But most of the books that I've seen on parenting teenagers kind of recommend to parents to not to fight this, right? Because teenagers know that they know that they're financially dependent. They know even you know we at IFP we often have this conversation. Oh, they're turning 18 in 2 months. What are we going to do? Well, do they have a job? Can they rent their own place? Do they know how to do things by themselves? Usually the answer, I mean, we know that a lot of, I think the average age now of leaving home is like 26 or something. Or maybe not the average, but the range. So they're dependent on us, and you'll see that most kids do want guidance from grown-ups if it is provided in a way that doesn't irritate them too much. So we do, when we do, and that, so we'll talk about how to make that happen. But there's going to be, but having said that, there is the constant push to, you know, pushing parents away, or kind of at least having this idea that, you know, you're not cool, or I heard this before, or the eye rolling and all those things. I really want to have to talk about attachment without. Okay, so then the other thing that we need to address when we're working with a parent is how they parent. And I'm sure everybody's familiar with this kind of breakdown. There are other ways to break parenting styles. We sometimes use in IFP an emotional intelligence kind of breakdown that's a little, there's some overlap in terms of usually the more rigid style of parenting is going to be a little bit more cut off from emotion and not pay attention to emotion as much. The more permissive might will have its own way of not helping kids process or identify or give guidance around emotion and other things. So there's some overlap, but this is the most popular kind of breakdown. Do you guys have a sense which style do we tend to, if there is, I don't know if we really kind of see everything, or if in your experience we tend to see maybe more kids that are engaged in any of these styles more than others.
I have a lot of parents who have two very different parenting styles. So
between the parents?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's no consistent message. So one person's more permissive and the other one's more authoritarian.
And that causes problems. What do you think? Why is that a problem? What are the problems that you're seeing caused to the kids?
There's a lot of splitting behaviors. So maybe dad is more authoritarian. So go to mom to get, you know, if dad won't let me have the car, but mom won't let me. Or if they get caught using substances, dad might be really rigid on the rules, but mom will give it a pass, or vice versa.
And causing a lot of confusion and frustration. Right, and I think we're right now seeing it not just in in divorced families, but even within a family, this dynamics, parents who do live together, we're still seeing those kind of dynamics. Well, in some, if you read books about helping kids work through divorce or manage things like that, it is sometimes said that kids should be able to manage, to adjust to two different styles. The problem is when it becomes, when they're able to split and they're able to tweak that to what they think is their advantage, and we know that sometimes ends up, that can end up very badly. Do you guys talk about this with parents? Has it been helpful introducing this to parents, or is this more sometimes feel that it's good for us, but I'm not always sure if parents are not helpful for them?
It depends on their insight, like their own style and their own, like how willing they are to admit
and their own upbringing.
Yeah, or interest. Yeah, and what? So I think. Yeah, so there's so many things that go into it, right? But for an insightful parent, sometimes them being able to recognize that they were brought up in a certain way, but maybe that's not how they were parent, that's an insight that's very significant and can help a parent change their style, make that, it's a big change, right? Because parenting is, parenting is a behavior almost. It's not, there's so many things that you need to do and just to keep the kids alive. So to change those habits that have to do with feeding and, when they're little, it has to do with toileting and all of that. Those are such primal and things that we don't spend a lot of time thinking. So when we ask parents to change their parenting style, it's sometimes a real open heart surgery, kind of, because a lot of the reactions are not they don't go through our deciding parts of the brain. We just that's what we do, and it often comes from our childhood. But parents who are able to reflect on that, sometimes this is helpful to share with them so they can make that decision. Okay, I don't want to do this. I do want to do this. For parents who are more focused on kind of solving problems and focused on more immediate things, we can guide towards this or the other. Sometimes the theory behind it, where the bigger picture isn't necessarily helpful to them. Other thoughts on parenting styles?
Culture is huge.
Absolutely.
So you are raised in a listen, that doesn't look like culture. So you are expected to be what you learn. That's how society sees you as a
Right. And I've worked with families where the parent was doing what they thought was expected of them, and the child probably would have been okay with that had they not been going to an American school where they're getting all these other messages about independence and about needing to do, needing to be sexually active in teenage years, things that the culture does not, and so there's a cultural clash in the family, and it has to do with, and in that case, I don't even know if I would call it authoritative parenting. It's just really different cultural expectations, that are there. And can be quite dramatic. I worked with a family where, when I was working in City Heights, a lot of the parents were rationally super protective of their children, not wanting their children out in the streets because there are gangs, because there's drugs, because some parts of that neighborhood are not very safe, to the point where they lock their kids in the house. A teenager, and the 16-year-old comes to me and she's completely depressed. She's not even rebelling, she's just out of sorts. And the parents have good reason to do this, because of the dangers that they're very well aware of, and yet here's the kid who's failing to thrive, and it's wasn't a one-time thing to kind of figure out what to do, because it is really a difficult situation for everybody.
So my question would be, if you explain that to a teenager, so they can understand the parents, can that help?
I'm afraid that the key word here is depends, right? Some parents are open, you know, some parents are more aware of the different, you know, I'm not in my home country anymore and things here are different, and they can understand more where their child is coming from, as opposed to some parents who just really think that what they're doing is right and have a harder time. And that's a trend now in parenting, actually, and it has different names. When it comes from a psychodynamic place, there you'll see that you can get trainings in mentalization, and the idea of mentalization is to train parents to do exactly that, to think. We have all our thoughts about what's right and what should be and how we want to do it. Okay, what's your child's situation? And you know, and this isn't new. This is old, right? We sometimes call it empathy, but it's become a kind of a tool to really have parents spend time thinking. You know, sure, you needed to go to work and your child is doing a tantrum and you're going to be late to work, and okay, but let's step back from that. What do you think was going on for your child? So for us, this is kind of that's what we do for a living. But for a lot of parents, that's if they're capable. I think that some people just can't do it. But if you find that spark, that they're interested in thinking about other people's minds and what's going on for them, that sometimes can be. But it's the kind of work that's a little longer. It's not like hands-on parenting. It's more helping parents really create a theory of mind, and that can help avoid conflict and do a lot of things. Usually that's less, yeah, maybe for us it could be helpful too, though I feel that when there's a lot of conflict, that we really need to get them to a place where they can do this kind of. So parents who can do that, yeah, having that conversation usually can be helpful. Or I've worked with a lot of families where, right, the family is living in poverty in our standards, but for the parents, they don't see it. They're more focused on the sacrifice that they have made to even be here and to get here and to give their children a better, more opportunities and a better life maybe, and the child is upset because they can't get the iPad they want. And there's this kind of it's a cultural clash, like one is looking back and one is looking forward, and a lot of upset feelings around that. And parents who then feel that they're being mistreated, or their children are unthankful or ungrateful. Yeah, a lot of things like that around immigration. Let's see where we are on my list. Right. So I think we touched on most of these things. How much time do I have? I want to. So these are the most frequently recommended books here, I think, because these are my favorite books. I don't know if anybody has theirs. Does anybody have another favorite book that you use with parents? So Beyond Consequences is an attachment-based book. It focuses on attachment. It was written in mind with families who have adopted or are in foster care and there's an attachment issue, and helping the parents who are very focused on behaviors and less focused on the emotions, and helping those parents, again, identify with what's going on for the child as opposed to an understanding. And that's, I think, sometimes that that we need to kind of try and convey, and sometimes we need to do it for the child, kind of let the parent know, yes, you're right, and then there's this whole thing here that's your child, and it's just not the same, and we need to. So this book talks about a lot about how when kids are anxious, really, and a lot of the time parents get into these clashes, interpreting the child's anxiety, especially with traumatized kids, because their anxiety can look angry and oppositional. But if you think about it as anxiety, that can help parents accommodate better. Brainstorm is the sequel. You have the first book is on the printout. Dr. Siegel is a psychiatrist, so he talks a lot about brain development in the different brain regions and kind of explaining different behaviors based on what's going on in the brain, but then he also breaks it down into some more less obscure terminology and specific tools. And he also talks, he doesn't call it visualization, he has a different name, mind, something with the word mind, but it's the same idea, helping parents think about what's going on in their kid's psyche as separate from them, and as in order to reduce reactivity and those kind of things. And it has exercises, it's a pretty neat book. And my latest favorite is Untangled. It is written for about girls, which I think is at the least a good what's the word? Compensation for all the years that books were written only about boys. But again, most of the things are compatible. Most of the I don't know, 90% is probably as important for boys as it is for girls. Then there's the more specific things. And she talks about those differences. And it's hilarious. It's a really good read. I highly recommend it. I actually, a parent at IFP recommended this book. So it's very accessible, and I think you'd enjoy it. So we have 5 more minutes. Are there any questions, comments on our journey through parenthood, parenting teenagers?
The transgender issue is really popular. Or even just between girls wanting to be boys or dress like boys or act like boys, and parents are
that is something that probably our parents were able to do more successfully and were able not to deal with, and now parents can't. Maybe they try, but it might be a little more difficult. What do you guys see in terms of with the transgender kids or the questioning kids that you've worked with? What are some parenting things that come up?
Well, I think there's a grief aspect to it, because for the first however many years of the kid's life, they viewed it as, this was my son, and then all of a sudden, they're told one day, like, this is not my son, they have to recalibrate everything, which to me, very, it's like someone died and someone else is reborn.
Yeah. It's a huge adjustment, for sure. And it really involves like loss and grieving, and we need, I think sometimes we forget that. I think a lot of the times when we work with LGBT or with LGB or transgender kids, we kind of take on the kids' side, and and we want to support them, and we might forget that that's all great, and it's good that we're supportive, but the parents have to go through their own process, and it can take a long time. And then there are all the variables of culture and religion and open-mindedness and ability to understand, enmeshment or listen or whatever else is going on. But we need to sometimes I think it's helpful for us to remind the kids that that's, and it's harder I think with teenagers because they're less open to the idea that their parents are separate. They just want, I've been struggling with this all my life, and finally I make this step. They need to be right there with me, which is a little bit of a childish and self-centered kind of approach, and sometimes we need to kind of help them digest the idea that, but you've been working on this, we've been talking about this for a year, and you've been dealing with this, all this time, and this is new to your parents, and there's grief involved, and we need to respect that too. And probably applaud parents who are willing to go through that as opposed to parents who really just don't want to go through that. You heard me recommend this show, The Fosters. It's an, I think, ABC show. You can see most of it on Netflix. So I think in their last season they had a transgender kid, and they showed really nicely that struggle, and the friend's friend, Kelly, who's kind of the main character in the whole series, she just kind of started yelling at the parents and kind of, why aren't you supportive, and why are you calling him by his girl name? And then she's become aware of how hard it's been for mom to not have a daughter anymore, and to let go of the fantasies she had for her child. She wanted to walk her down the aisle, and she wanted to go shopping with her, and all of those things that a lot of times we don't pay attention to. Even as parents, we don't think about that baggage of expectations that we have, and then suddenly the therapist comes and says, well, your kid is here's the deal, and so we need to really be supportive of everybody in the process, because it is a big shift for everybody. And parents are usually lagging behind a little bit. But I also feel that we've seen here some kids who maybe had too much who maybe didn't have enough time to really figure out what's going on, weren't given opportunities to really, am I gay or am I transgender? What is this? Things quickly turned into changing gender. So we know that for some kids it's clear, it's strong and there's no doubt, but I think that for some kids it's not that clear and cut. And some parents, I feel, maybe run with it a little fast. We don't like the ambiguity, so sometimes we become very supportive, but really the ambiguity is important, and the process is important to really tease out what is this attraction? Is this an attraction? Is this an identity? Is this, what are these things? And we know there's a documentary about transgender kids and how doctors, about the dilemma that doctors and parents have as far as, do we do these unreversible changes with someone who's really just a child? And it's a real dilemma. The movie doesn't even have an opinion if it's good or not. It's a dilemma. We don't know long term what happens with these things.
And I think the piece of it too that kind of goes into identity development, like if people, sometimes I think parents kind of put off that process of grieving by just chalking it up to like them, just trying to try on different things and see what fits, and so it kind of ends up invalidating their kid's experience when it isn't something that's really respected. But I think a lot more of it to look beyond that is like the difficulty that they're having, if that's really the case, and what that would mean for them and the family.
Right, and to the parents, it's invalidating the parents' experience. You can be liberal and supportive and all of that thing, and still you need to grieve. You need to be sad for the things that maybe you had in mind and are not going to happen now, and be happy for your child's found happiness or whatnot. All right, guys, my time is up.